A very good morning to all of you. I think I'm audible.
Yes,
On
completely.
Yes,
behalf
sir.
on behalf of Society for Tax Analysis and Research, I and Shri Jaspal Singh Sethi ji, along with Mr. Amit Agarwal, we welcome you all to this webinar on the queries of the members. Uh, this is the second session of queries which we are holding, and the way we are getting the queries, I am actually, the number of queries which are coming in are more than what we can address in one seminar. So what we will be doing is we'll be having these particular seminar sessions more frequently once in a week. So we are trying for that, but I welcome you for today's session. Amit ji will be coordinating the entire session. In case you still feel that there is some more part which need to be addressed apart from what has been explained, you are most welcome to put it into the chat box, which we can take it up after the query is over. So Amit ji, can we start the session? Uh, Amit ji, can we start the session? Shailin ji, can you get on the first? Can you get on the first query, please?
Hello. Hello. Hello,
Another,
sir.
you're audible.
So there is some system problem from my side. I'm restarting my system, sir.
No problem. I'll do one thing. Meanwhile, I'll read out the query.
Yes,
This is
sir.
from Mr. Sachin Agarwal. This is from Mr. Sachin Agarwal. He is asking foreign holding company incurs traveling expenditure vis-a-vis lodging and boarding expenses and local expenses of the employees of Indian subsidiary company. Request all to put on mute whenever somebody is speaking. He can unmute the mic. Amit ji, you can please put it on mute. Thereafter, the foreign holding company issues an invoice to Indian subsidiary company for recovery or reimbursement of the said traveling expense on actual basis after giving detail of such expense incurred by the foreign holding company, and there is no profit element in such invoice. Whether the payment by the Indian subsidiary company to foreign holding company towards such invoice with respect to recovery of travel expenses is liable to GST under reverse charge as import of service. Sachin ji, if you look into your query, there are two parts to it, and I think you are going back to the days of Intercontinental, which was decided by Honorable Supreme Court, that reimbursements never form part of the consideration, and in accordance with that, the government had amended when this Delhi High Court ruling came in the service tax days. The definition of consideration was specifically amended in service tax to include the reimbursement part. However, that particular part was never there in the GST when it came. So that particular, I think, reimbursement must have been missed specifically to be put in into the definition of consideration. So consideration today also it remains any value which is to be paid payable in relation to in context of the supply which has been made. However, having said so, the question which should be reasoned out or which should be seen is whether this particular amount which is from the foreign holding company to the Indian company tantamounts number one to any supply, because if it is a supply then only it will be tantamounting to an import of service, then only we'll see that whether there is a the definition of import of service is satisfied or not. Number two, when you say it is a reimbursement at no profit or no loss, that will not make any difference. So the first thing which we need to see is whether there is any supply. When you say there is a supply, is the mandate. Now the question is a mandate why this particular foreign holding company has incurred those particular travel expenditure. It can be viewed from two perspectives. Number one, it can be a way, or it can be I would say the manner to evade any particular taxes by the company in order to structure the expense in such a manner that the implications of taxation does not fall when the expenditure is incurred by the foreign holding company. However, the other way, the other point can be that the foreign holding company incurred the expenditure because this particular employees were into the proximity or nearby countries of that particular foreign holding company. So, friends, in this particular case, you have to be very clear, be more elaborate on your facts. And when you're using the word reimbursement, at the outset, I will first take you to Rule 33. Rule 33 talks about the pure agent, the value of supply in the case of pure agent. Now, what is or who is a pure agent? That is also provided in the explanation to Rule 33. Pure agent means a person who enters into a contractual agreement with the recipient of supply to act as his pure agent to incur expenditure or cost in the course of supply of goods or services, or both. Number two, neither intends to hold or holds any title to the goods or services, or both, so procured or supplied as pure agent of the recipient of the supply. C, does not use his own interest, does not use for his own interest such goods or services so procured. And number four, receives only the actual amount incurred to procure such goods or services in addition to the amount received for supply of his own services on his own account. But friends, apart from this particular definition, so if you look into this particular definition, your question fulfills the entire thing. If I have to simply put into a very simple terms, who is a pure agent? I would say when the privity of contract is between the supplier and the recipient, and the person who is making the payment is nothing but he is a conduit for making the payment. So the invoice will be in the issue in the name of the Indian subsidiary company. The Indian subsidiary company enters into the privity with the foreign supplier to supply those particular services. The supplier knows that the obligation to pay is of the Indian subsidiary company, and the foreign holding company is mere facilitating the the receipt of that particular supply by the Indian subsidiary company. If these particular things are satisfied, then you can say that the foreign holding company made the payment in the capacity of a pure agent. Now, if it uh, happens to be a pure agent, then you can be very sure that for the purpose of GST, the value will be nil. There will be no value on which tax can be paid. The second and the larger question which comes is, suppose this particular arrangement, the invoice is in the name of foreign holding company. Now, in case foreign holding company, while engaging itself into the arrangement with the tour operator or the whatever the travel expenses are incurred on boarding and conveyance, with the supplier, the foreign holding company enters into an agreement whereby though invoices are in his name, the privity has been clearly explained that it is on the Indian subsidiary. So I am receiving these supplies for my Indian subsidiaries if it can be very clearly spelled out. Then in that particular case, under the contractual arrangement, there will be no supply between the foreign holding company and Indian subsidiary company. Similarly, the Indian subsidiary company also should very clearly put a particular mention in the mail to the foreign holding company that, sir, there these expenses please incur on our behalf and we will reimburse you the actual expenditure. These are the travel companies from which you have to obtain these services. If these mentions are very clear, then Sachinji, neither it's acts as a supplier nor there will be any value because pure agent will be satisfied. However, if the mandate is like this, that Indian subsidiary company asks the foreign holding company, sir, please arrange the following services for us, A, B, C, D, E. Now you have requested another deemed person as per Section 8 of IGST Act because they are distinct establishments, distinct persons. So you have asked another person to arrange a particular, boarding, lodging, local conveyance, etc. for you. Then in that particular case, there is a request for supply, and therefore the implications which will fall through will be accordingly there. Having said so, please also remember that mere supply will not tantamount to a reverse charge liability in India. What is important? The transaction should satisfy as a import of service. When will it satisfy the import of service? When it will be fulfilling the definition given in section 2 subsection 11 of the IGST Act, which says import of service means where the supplier is located outside India, satisfied in this case. Recipient is in India, satisfied in this case, and the place of supply of service is in India. Now here, the place of supply of service in case of a boarding expense, lodging expense, local conveyance will not fall within India. So even if it satisfies the criteria of the supplier, still the definition of import of supply is not satisfied, and therefore there cannot be any supply as per the definition given under section 7 of CGST Act. And therefore, my dear friend, you can be very safe if your invoice very clearly says from foreign holding company to Indian holding company that boarding and lodging at, let's say, Paris, local conveyance at Paris for less than 30 days. In all those cases, place of supply lies outside the taxable territory, and therefore it will not tantamount to an import of service. I trust that the reply has been duly received. It is a bit of a, I would say, the dilemma between two things: supply, import of service, and devaluation. So, Sachinji, take your own call on this particular aspect. We now move on to the second query for the day. This is from
This query,
CA Bajrang Agarwal. I
yes, sir.
think
This
this
query,
is an income tax query. Please, Shalinji, please.
can I read for? Can I read the query? अमित भाई का लैपटॉप एक्चुअली रिस्टार्ट हो रहा है, तो तब तक मैं आपको कंटिन्यू कर देता हूँ.
No problem. Jaspal ji, you are on mute.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The query is being asked by CA Bajrang Agarwal ji. The query is: assessee status individual make a joint development agreement during assessment year 2014-15 with builder and got 4 flats. The property belongs to family. The assessee received the possession during assessment year 2017-18. Assessing officer reopens the case under section 147 for the assessment year 2014-15 quarter 1. Whether reopen of case under section 147 is tenable in law, as this year near an agreement executed and right to develop given to builder quarter 2. What should right to develop given to builder? Question 2: what should be actual year of capital gain? Question 3: how the flats to be valued as those are not sold till date? And question 4: whether we can claim exemption under section 54F.
यहाँ पे
Jaspal ji,
am I audible? Okay. So I will reshare the facts that have been laid out in this question. Actually, the facts are intermingled and the questions are also intermingled. Now, there is a joint development agreement which was executed in the assessment year 14-15. Now, here there are two questions which are related to this question, which are whether the joint development agreement was registered or not. If yes, whether possession was also transferred and power of attorney was given to the builder. That is one question. In case the joint development agreement was registered and the power of attorney was also given, the capital gain arises in the year when the joint development agreement was entered into by virtue of section 247, meaning thereby it is covered under the definition of transfer. Now here there is one very basic ingredient which is missing, which is the fact that you have not mentioned whether any flat was given to the builder or not. What I am assuming from the question is that the possession was received from the builder in the assessment year 17-18. Further, it says in question number 3, how the flats to be valued as those are not sold till date? Well, if no flats have been sold, of course there is no capital gain. So it is, I can assume from the question is that it was only given on given to the builder on a contractual obligation. Now this is a very confusing question, but what I will do is I will presuppose this some conditions, and I will explain you the whole concept in a brief manner. Now sir, सवाल यहाँ पे क्या है कि एक मेरा घर है, मैंने बिल्डर को दे दिया, जो एक जनरल परसेप्शन होता है कि बिल्डर को दे दिया जाता है कि 4 फ्लोर बनाने हैं, 1 फ्लोर आप रख लीजिए, 3 बना के हमें दे दीजिए। इस तरह के जितने भी अग्रीमेंट्स होते हैं वो रजिस्टर्ड नहीं होते हैं, दे आर temporary agreements, and in such scenarios section 247 does not cover them. It is not a transfer within the definition of section 247. In such a scenario, the capital gain arises in the year when one of the flats is ultimately sold to the builder. In this scenario, what I am assuming is that the agreement was entered into in the assessment year 14-15. The builder completed the flats in the assessment year 17-18. The assessee also got its share of the flats in 17-18, and I'm supposing that the one flat which was required to be given to the builder was given in assessment year 17-18 itself. In such a scenario, sir, I will answer your questions. Question number 1 is whether reopening of the case under section 147 is tenable in law or not. No sir, 14-15 के अंदर कोई agreement नहीं है. वहां पे जो agreement है that is only for building of the property. That is, by that there is no capital gain that which is arising. Section 247 is not applicable, and any assessment which can be completed is only with respect to 17-18 when the transfer of capital, when the transfer of one flat takes place, and the capital gain can arise. Now sir, I will come to the other question. Right, okay, what should be the actual, this is also answered, it is 17-18, the actual year of capital gain. Sir, valuation of flats, now this is one question. Valuation of flats is not required to be done as such. It is only the one flat which is required to be valued is the flat that is given to the builder. Of course, it is to be valued at the cost it is sold, or it is in this situation when there is a contractual obligation, bilateral obligation that in place of building 3 flats, he is receiving 1 flat. In such a scenario, sir, it is to be valued at the circle rate or the amount which is invested into building of the 3 flats, whichever is higher. मान लो आपके एक फ्लैट की वैल्यू 1 करोड़ रुपया आ रही है, बट बिल्डर ने एक्चुअली उसके अंदर जो एक्सपेंस किया है वो 1 करोड़ 25 लाख रुपया किया है, तो जो वैल्यू है हमारे 3 फ्लोर बनाने की, वो वैल्यू, वो कॉस्ट उसको आई है, that will be the cost of sale, and it will be 1.25 crores. If it is less than 1.25 crores or 1 crore, that is the circle rate, the valuation will be 1 crore rupees, which is the circle rate. And finally, the fourth question, which is whether capital claim of section 54F is to be allowed or not. Yes sir, it is available. यहाँ पे एक और बात ध्यान रखनी पड़ेगी कि जहाँ पे आपका फ्लैट जो है वो 3 साल से ज्यादा में बना है. Now the 54 section under section the provision under section 54 says that an investment can be allowed if the expense has been incurred 1 year before or 2 years after the date when the capital gain arises. Sir, in this scenario there is a problem. यहाँ पे आपको 1 साल पहले की कॉस्ट मिलेगी और उससे पहले के जो खर्चे हैं वो शायद मिलने में तकलीफ होगी, क्योंकि आपके जो खर्चे हैं वो पहले से चलते आ रहे हैं. हालांकि देयर इज अ जजमेंट ऑफ द ITAT, rather there are quite a few judgments. I can share that offline. I don't remember the name of the judgments precisely at the moment, जहाँ पे extra time allow किया गया है by the courts in when there was unnecessary delay in building of the flats, and the assessee has already incurred their part of the obligations by paying to the builders. Now, this is a little different. There are facts are a little different in this scenario. But I suppose that the benefit of those judgments can be availed in this scenario. But in principle, Section 54F definitely is available against to be set off against the capital. I hope I am able to justify the query in the questions that were available to me. Shailin bhai.
I think Shailin ji, can we move on to
Yes, sir.
the next one?
Yes, sir. Taking the next question, it is asked by Mr. Mahendra Jain. The query is: can an excess IGST credit claim in the financial year in 3B return can be adjusted up to September 3B return of next financial year from the credit available in 3B? From the credit available in 3B return with payment of interest, or should the excess claim be paid through DRC 03 along with the interest? Which is the correct procedure? Gaurav sir, आपके लिए.
Sir, the answer is, I think, pretty simple. DRC 03 is a mechanism which is to be resorted in case of any demand or recovery of any tax during the pendency of any proceedings. In the normal course, you should stick, if you are making a reversal, you should stick to your returns, which is primarily 3B. When you have taken a credit which was not otherwise available to you, you should simply put it into other reversal in your 3B return. And in that particular case, whatever amount will be there will be shown as a demand from you. And you can simply pay that particular amount through your 3B only, either through your credit ledger or through your cash ledger, whatever is available to you. So please do not make the payments through DRC 03. That will delink the entire, because DRC 03 is not linked to annual return. There is no mechanism, but anything which you do in 3B will be duly reflected in your annual return. Brother, I think we can proceed.
The next question is asked by Mr. Sachin Agarwal. Again to you, sir. Query on section 17 subsection 1 of CGST Act, read with rule 42 of CGST rules. In case of a registered person being a company, kindly give examples of instances where goods and services are used partly for business purpose and partly for non-business purpose.
Sachinji, the examples are very simple in those particular terms when it is a case of a proprietor. I understand. Because, for example, proprietor using the motor vehicle, or for that matter, the proprietor using the mobile phone or laptop for personal purposes only. Now, when you say non-business purpose, it does not define the as to who is using it for non-business purpose. So if an employee is being given the mobile phone, and that particular employee is using that particular mobile phone for non-business purpose, meaning thereby for talking to his family, his friends, and so on, then what you will say, where has the company utilized those particular goods in the course and furtherance of his business? Now, there are two perspectives which can be made out of it. Number one, if you say yes, it has been used because it has been given to an employee, and as per the terms of the employment contract. This particular clarification has also been there in the ITC, the clarifications issued by the circular, I think number 92. Any supply by the supplier to the employee as per the contractual arrangement will not tantamount to supply. However, as per Schedule 1, any use or any supply of asset on which ITC has been taken will be a deemed supply. Meaning thereby, if any asset of the company is being used for purpose other than the business or commerce of the company, that means there is a supply by that particular company of that asset for a purpose beyond its business. So an employee using a motor vehicle, so a director using a motor vehicle can be seen from two perspectives. Either it can be seen as a supply from the company to the director of that particular motor vehicle if credit has been taken thereon, or otherwise also for his personal purpose, and thus supply is effected. Because for the personal purpose, that can never be a part of the contractual agreement unless it's a perquisite. And if it is a perquisite, then either it will be a supply or a proportionate ITC should be reversed, because that particular supply, if we go into the shelter of circular on ITC, we can contest that that particular amount will not be called a supply, because it was under a employment contractual arrangement, and therefore in those particular cases, since it is used for the non-business purpose, there has to be a reversal to the extent of 5%. It is not towards exempt supply. So under Rule 42, it will fall within the ambit of reversal at the rate of 5% by the company on such particular asset. I think that will be a very safer position. If you are doing so, then read along with that circular, when you will read Rule 42, the courts will come to your rescue. If you are not doing so, then I can tell you, my dear friend, you are sitting on a peril which tomorrow might result into a demand under Schedule 1 on being called a supply of use of goods for purposes other than the business purpose by the company to the employee. So that particular debate will be still, I can foresee that will be one of the biggest debates in the coming times. Next, sir.
Sure, sir. Next query is pertaining to, I think, income tax. It has been asked by Mr. Bajrang Agarwal ji again. The query is survey conducted by investigation wing under section 133A. Just a minute, sir. Dairy impoundment for recording expenses. Dairy impoundment for recording expenses approx 203 lakhs. Assessee books audited. AO records the reason to report the case under section 147 that 203 lakhs expenses disallowed under section 40 capital A subsection 3. Question 1. Whether the action of AO is tenable. Question 2. Can we take up clear that since the AO act on findings of investigation team and have not verified the return data with his possession, and take a opinion that the entire expense of rupees 203 lakh is disallowed, is clearly proves that the AO has not applied his mind. Jain there. Sorry, sir. Read the last
please.
line. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I'm not able to unable to read the last line.
I guess that the complete the narration of the sentence is not correctly made. Well, anyways, I don't think so that makes much of a difference. सर यहाँ पे फैक्ट्स क्या हैं कि एक सर्वे हुआ है by the investigation wing under section 133A, and some dairy has been impounded where some expenses of about 2.3 crores, 203 lakhs has been found. Assessee's books have already been audited and a return has been filed. AO recorded the reason to report the case under section 147 that 203 lakh expenses disallowed by 404. सर यहाँ पे सबसे पहले दो चीजें देखनी पड़ेंगी कि जब सर्वे हुआ है तो सर्वे की रिपोर्ट में क्या लिखा गया है कि whether what does this expense of 203 lakhs say, whether these expenses of 203 lakhs were in cash or by means of some checks. सेकेंडली सर जब भी सर्वे होता है उस टाइम पे भी जो सर्वे रिपोर्ट बनती है वहां पे भी बुक्स देखी जाती है. अगर बुक्स अगर उसको 203 लाख रुपीस कौन से पीरियड से पर्टेन करते हैं, सबसे पहले वो देखने वाली बात है. मान लो सर्वे हुआ है 2018 के अंदर और जो एक्सपेंसेस हैं वो फाइंड आउट होते हैं कि हमने 2 करोड़ 3 लाख रुपए के खर्चे वहां पे मिले हैं pertaining to that very assessment year or the previous assessment years. अगर वो previous assessment year से हैं तो of course they have to be compared with the books of accounts which have been audited and filed. Now, if those expenses have not been recorded, that will become a part and parcel of the report of the investigation officer making the survey report. If he has compared the two results and then reported in the survey report, the assessing officer is truly justified on the basis of the investigation report to reopen the case. In case they are not related to the previous assessment year and they are related to the current assessment year, of course they will never be a part of the what do you call the audit report, and the books of accounts must be pending for completion. Now the books of accounts up to the date of survey can also be checked whether they were recorded or not. In case they are in cash, of course they will not be part of the books, or they may not be a part of the books which are recorded up till that time. बट मेरा मानना ये है कि अगर डायरी के अंदर खर्चे मिले हैं तो वो चेक से 99% पॉसिबिलिटी है कि ना हो, and they will not be a part of the books of accounts. In such a scenario, sir, it is very much justified by the for the assessing officer to base his findings and reasons to believe for reopening of the case. They will be treated as justified reasons. Shalin bhai.
Yes, sir, sure. The next question, moving to the next question, it is for Gaurav, sir, I think, pertaining to GST, asked by Mr. Sagar Kumar, Ms. Sagar Kumar. The question is, where a company is having branches in multiple states and engage in undertaking work contract services, are they supposed to cross-charge the common admin expense such as salary, audit fees, etc. as per AAAR ruling of Columbia Asia, or can they claim the benefit of second proviso to Rule 28 and bill other branches a nominal value of ₹100 as full ITC is available to the other branch?
I forgot to unmute. Now the question is saying that it is engaged in undertaking the works contract services, meaning thereby it is working on some immovable properties in different states. Now, are they supposed to cross-charge the common admin expenses, meaning thereby they already have branches or establishments in different states? Are they supposed to cross-charge the expenses like salary, audit fees, as per the AAAR ruling of Columbia Asia, or can they claim the benefit of second proviso to Rule 28 and bill other branches at a nominal value of ₹100 as full IT is available to the other branch? Now, Sagarji, there are two perspectives to it. The first perspective is Columbia Asia does not speak about the valuation. Columbia Asia speaks about the supply, whether there will be a supply from one branch to another in case of common management expenses undertaken at the head office level. So the appellate authority in the case of Columbia Asia, it answered the question in affirmative, that yes, there will be a supply. Now for that supply, whether the value of salaries and everything will be taken, yes, they will be taken. But the case of Columbia Asia was relating to a company where the branches could not have taken the entire credit because it was a hospital chain, and therefore the benefit in terms of Rule 28 second proviso was never tested in that particular case. The case only had the possibility, or it had only had the option to supply at an open market value, which is provided by Rule 28, and it can be other rules apply if the first one is not available. In your case, when the entire credit can be taken, the first question whether there will be a supply from head office of the common services, sir, audit is not a service. But if we say what about salary, don't look at salary as a service. Look at what actually head office is doing. If you say head office is looking after the management of all the branches, yes, sir, there is a management supply by the head office to the other units. I would prefer to call it as a business support service, because they are providing legal support, they are providing taxation support, they are providing accounting support, they are also providing the support in terms of administration and the general overall working of the branches. So I would simply put it as a business support service for all kinds of support services, including management, legal, taxation, etc. Now, having said so, if the supply is there, the second question comes is what will be the value of that particular supply? The value of that particular supply will be as per Rule 28 to 32, as per the formulas given, rather 31. And in case the receiving branch, which is under doing a supply of purely taxable services, it is eligible to take the credit of the entire amount, then Sagar, in that particular case, whatever value is mentioned on the invoice will be considered as the transaction value, and GST, or rather it has been said, it will be taken as an open market value, and GST will be exigible on the amount which is mentioned on the invoice. So zero or nil cannot be amount. Apart from nil, whatever value you put, 100, 10,000, 1 lakh, 10 crore, that is completely your choice. Rule 28 second proviso will definitely come to your particular rescue. And the validity of Rule 28 second proviso has already been upheld in many cases by the Authority for Advanced Rulings, particularly in the case of state of West Bengal, and one was from Goa and Kerala. Shalinji, next one.
Sir, next question is for Jaspal sir. It is just a second, sir. Our client has to pay royalty for design registered in US as they purchase goods of that registered design from China and sell in US without bringing them into India. High sales. Whether reverse charge is applicable on royalty? If yes, what is the rate? Will it make any difference if they manufacture also some design in India and export to US?
Well, sir, I guess the question is related to income tax, but it is for Gaurav Bhai because it is pertaining to reverse charge.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Which
By
is
mistakenly, I have told your
the
name.
GST.
The moment you see the word reverse charge, it will shift back to reverse to
Yes, yes,
GST.
sure.
So I'll take
Yes.
on this particular
Reverse
question. So
to
this
user.
Vinita ji, forward charge, reverse charge, you have equivalent levy in that particular case in income tax. I also was considering one thing before, for benefit of Jaspalji, one very simple question,
Yeah.
which after this particular question, you please look into it. Is equivalent levy, I might be misspelling that particular levy, which is there in income tax, which is on the, which you fondly call as a Google tax. Is Google tax a part of the value of the consideration, or is it a tax to be borne by the importer of that particular service? So that is one simple question.
No, sir. I think we'll have to
Meanwhile,
elaborate.
I'll just answer this.
Please.
Huh.
No. So what I'm saying
this
is,
particular question, our client has to.
no. But what I was saying is that here a royalty has to be paid to a US entity for purchase of goods. सर जो इनकम टैक्स में इसका वो है वहां पे रॉयल्टी जो पेमेंट होगी उसके ऊपर टीसीएस है, टीडीएस है अंडर सेक्शन 195 being payment to a foreign company. So TDS is applicable whenever any amount is paid to a foreign company, whether or not the goods have come to India. तो इनकम टैक्स में तो आई थिंक टीडीएस के अलावा कहीं से कुछ हिट नहीं कर रहा है, and TDS is definitely applicable on such a scenario.
Okay. Now, from a GST perspective, Vinita ji, you first have to understand that it is only the import of services which are exigible under GST. When you're speaking about import of goods, along with the designs and everything, that will be forming the part of the import of goods. That will not be taxable under the GST statute, but under the Customs Act. And therefore, in this particular case, GST will not be leviable under the GST Act, even if it is a royalty paid to the on the purchase of goods. It will be driven by the Customs Act per se. So we can move on to the next question now.
Next question is also for GST, sir. It's a registered dealer under GST sold some goods during lockdown period without raising tax invoice or challan. Department conducted search during lockdown and found that stock physically available is lower as compared to available in book. How much penalty can be levied under this offence? As per Section 122 of CGST Act, penalty should be 100% of tax evaded with minimum amount of rupees 10,000. Can this penalty be restricted to 10% of tax evaded if dealer proves that his intention was not bad to evade the tax? It is due to unprecedented and unavailable situation of COVID-19 that he cannot issue invoice due to absence of his account staff. If yes, under which section of GST case can be settled at 10% of tax evaded? Please guide.
Sir, the query is totally, I would say, not in line with the present situation. Unfortunately, he cleared the goods in the
I'm sorry
lockdown.
to intervene. I'm sorry to intervene. This is a very, very hypothetical situation. Sir, first and foremost, मैं
Right.
एक मिनट गौरव जी से पहले लॉकडाउन चल रहा है, कौन सी अथॉरिटी काम कर रही है, सर्वे कौन सी टीम करने आ रही है, कहाँ सर्वे कर रही है, दुकान बंद पड़ी है तो सर्वे कहाँ करके जाएगी? So I don't think so. The query itself is anywhere justified to be answered in a legal manner. Over to you.
I am in complete agreement. I would definitely like to appraise all the members. If any of the teams are coming for any kind of search during this particular period, it should be seen as a complete contravention of the instructions from Ministry of Home Affairs, rather than
Yes.
problem from GST perspective. Now, second thing is, you have sold some goods. Those goods are missing. That is a problem where a tax evasion has to be established. When the due date of tax has been extended by the government, where can be the possibility of a tax evasion right now? That is something. Second, if the goods are not there and the invoice was not issued, that was a subject matter of Section 129, where the authorities would have detained the goods, or was checking the goods during the transit. It is not a case, because only 3 sections have not been put to rest, including 129 and 130, and also Section 12. So there are very limited sections of the GST law which are active in this particular lockdown period. So Mukulji, I think this particular hypothetical situation has not a live one but a carved out one. If you still have this as a live one, you're most welcome to contact me in person. Please, sir.
The next question is also of GST of Mr. Sachin Agarwal. The question is, in case of insurance claim raised by a car dealer for accident repair of a car on the customer who is also a registered person and the car is a business asset of the customer, query is where GST is payable on the insurance claim paid by the insurance company to the car dealer in case of cashless insurance claim. Second is where payment is made by the customer to the car dealer for the accident repair and thereafter insurance claim is paid by the insurance company to the customer. Whether GST is payable by the customer on the amount of insurance claim received from the insurance company.
See, Sachinji, the contract of insurance is a contract of indemnity. There is a insurable interest. It's not a contract of wager. That is the first thing which we have to understand. These particular contracts are valid contracts. In these particular cases, once you have paid the insurance premium, that is the point when there is a supply, when you have purchased a particular insurable interest from that particular insurance company, and in case of unforeseeable events, there will be a requirement of payment of indemnity of the loss which is made. So number one, the amount which is paid by the insurance company to the person is not a consideration for supply, but it is a indemnity for the loss which has been incurred by that particular person, for which he has already undertaken the contract of insurance, for which he has paid the insurance premium and on which GST has been paid. Number two, on whom the repair company will raise the invoice. Now, in this particular case, the cashless insurance case, the indemnity of payment is not made to the person but to the repair shop. Now, this repair shop is providing services to whom? That is the question. to my humble opinion, entire insurance industry is not, so what they are doing is they are taking the invoices also, and they are taking the credits of such particular claims also, to my humble opinion. It is my opinion. I am not saying that it is correct or not correct, because this will definitely go into court of law tomorrow. But to my humble opinion, the correct position should be that the claim of that particular repair, whether it can be taken or not to be taken, will be vested with the owner of the car. And what insurance company is doing, rather than making a payment of indemnity to the person, it is making a convenience payment to the repair shop. And therefore, my dear friend, the insurance company, in my humble opinion, cannot take the credit of that particular GST. Neither that invoice of repair will belong to the insurance company. There is no vehicle owned by the insurance company. There is no service which has been claimed by the insurance company. The entire thing is of the owner, and it is only the indemnity which has been done by that particular insurance company. So this particular concept is a very controversial concept, because this is actually going in a different manner, as I understand this particular arrangement. And I have already seen this in one of the cases, so I hold my views different from the practice which is prevailing in the market. Right, sir?
Next question again of Sachin Ji of GST. Question is, what is the rate of interest which is payable under section 73.5, 73.8, 74.5 and 74.8 of the CGST Act?
So the provisions, when you speak about, because you have mentioned multiple provisions, let me just first read out the provisions for you. I'll take 2 minutes on this particular question, because they have mentioned very specific. 73.5. The person chargeable with tax before service of notice under subsection 1, or as the case may be, the statement. Now, this is doing what? It is saying very clearly that the person has been given option to pay the tax along with interest under section 50. So friends, under 73.5, this is very clear that interest will be under under section 50. To my humble opinion, and the entire 73 is relying on section 50. But since you have mentioned particular sections, I'm just looking at it. Again, 73.8 mentions about section 50. 74.5 again will be speaking in terms of section 50. There will not be any different interest which can be levied. And again, 74.8 is dependent on section 50. So section 50 is the section under which the rates have been provided, which is 18% and 24% in the two cases. In case of 4210 and 4310, 24%, and in the case of short payment of tax, it is 18%. So, my dear friend, in all these cases, the interest should be payable under all these circumstances at 18%. Why 24% is not applicable? Because as on date, 4210 and 4310 are not effective because we don't have GSTR 2 and 3 the way it has been envisaged in 4210 and 4310. So, to my humble opinion, Sachinji, you can safely pay under section 50 interest at the rate of 18%. Next, sir.
Next question is of income tax to Jaspal sir. The question is of CA Bajrang Agrawal ji. Question is, a proprietorship firm taking transport services from various vendors or transport agencies. These vendors or agencies give declaration that they do not have more than 10 lorries. On the basis of these, the firm is not deducting TDS. But the fact that such vendor or agencies might have lorries, but they have arranged these from others. The assessing officer is of the view that the vendors use the lorries of other persons. Total number of lorries engaged by some vendors are more than 10. Hence, TDS is liable to be deducted. Question is whether the view of the assessing officer is correct. Second is, once we receive declaration from the vendor, whether the onus is on SSE's part to verify the number of lorries the vendors have engaged. Other is whether the Mumbai ITAT decision in case of income tax officer 17.3 subclause 4 versus Sugarcam, Mumbai will support in the instant case?
Thank you, Madhur. See, the provision here involved is section 194C, and to be precise, section 194C subsection 6 and subsection 7 are involved here, which deal with contractual payments to transporters for transporting of goods. Now, sir, transporters ke upar TDS was waived off. Rather, it was not a part of 194C for a very, very long time. However, when this provision, when we came back from the era of जब TDS transporters पे लगता था और refunds उसके अंदर होते थे, then it was totally taken away, and then some compliances were added to section 194C in the case of transporters. Now what happens was, जो transporter जिनके पास the words used are who own not more than 10 lorries. So here the only thing that has to be checked by a contractor while giving while taking services from a transporter, he has to take a declaration from the transporter whether or not he owns more than 10 trucks or not. Second compliance that is required to be made is he has to take the PAN number of the vendor, the transporter, and section subclause 7 of 194C states that such transactions have to be reported in the statement, quarterly statement, that is to be filed on a quarterly basis. Now sir, यहाँ पे जो requirement है ये basically ये है subsection 6 ये कहता है कि I'll read out the provision precisely. No deduction shall be made from any sum credited or paid or likely to be credited or paid during the previous year to the account of a contractor during the course of business of flying, hiring or leasing goods carriage, where such contractor owns, again I'm specifying owns, 10 or less goods carriage at the time during the previous year and furnishes a declaration to that effect along with his permanent account number to the person paying or credited such sum. Sir, the requirement laid out in this section is that the contractor, that is the transport provider, should not own more than 10 trucks, and he has to give a declaration to the contractee, to the person assigning the contract, that I do not own more than 10 trucks and yes, you do not deduct my TDS under section 194 subclause 6. जहां पे उसने ये declaration दे दी है, my requirement to deduct TDS goes away. Definitely, it is not my area to verify whether he owns more than 10 trucks or not. मेरा काम नहीं है कि मैं उसके जाके बुक्स चेक करूं या उसके रिकॉर्ड्स चेक करूं ट्रांसपोर्ट डिपार्टमेंट के पास कि उसके 10 ट्रक से ज्यादा है कि नहीं है. इट इज नॉट माय जॉब. इफ आई हैव अ डिक्लेरेशन ड्यूली साइंड बाय हिम, माय जॉब इज डन. सेकेंडली सर, सबसेक्शन 7 कहता है कि मैंने वो जो भी ट्रांजैक्शन उससे एंटर करी है पैन नंबर के साथ मैं उसको रिपोर्ट करूंगा अपनी क्वार्टरली स्टेटमेंट के अंदर. नाउ सर, आपने एक लास्ट में जजमेंट शेयर करी है विच इज ऑफिसर 1734 versus Sugarcam Mumbai. Sir, the complete name of the judgment is Income Tax Officer versus Sugar. This is a ITAT judgment bench D of Mumbai. सर, इससे पहले भी ITAT कैलकाटा की कुछ जजमेंट्स हैं जो इस इशू को कवर कर चुकी हैं, जिसके बेसिस पे इस केस के अंदर भी CIT अपील ने इसको डिसअलाउंसेस को डिलीट कर दिया था. Now, after the order of the CIT appeals, the department went to the tribunal, and the appeal was partly allowed by the tribunal on a very different facts. मैं इसमें थोड़ी सी डिटेल में जाना चाहूंगा. यहाँ पे टोटल डिसअलाउंसेस हुए थे of an amount of 80,23,971 by the assessing officer on an allegation that the number of trucks, the compliances by the assessee were not complete in respect of 194(7). That is, he did not report it in his quarterly statements. सर CIT अपील्स के पास जब ये कंपनी गई, वहां पे they relied upon the judgment of Kali Kinnaur Roy versus Income Tax Officer. This is ITA number 1676 Calcutta 2016, dated 31st of October 2017. In this, the Calcutta ITAT held that the provisions of section 194(6) and 194(6)(7) are independent of each other, meaning thereby the requirement of deducting TDS or not is contained in subsection 6, and there is a further requirement which is completely independent of the deduction which is contained in subsection 7, meaning thereby कि अगर मैंने compliances नहीं भी करी in respect of subsection 7, my deduction is not affected. It is not that only by means of not reporting the transactions in the quarterly statements, my requirement to deduct TDS will arise and disallowances under section 40 will arise. No, sir. ITAT held they are different provisions. However, agar jo conditions those are laid out in subsection 6 itself for the purpose of going out of the provisions of 194(6), अगर वो comply नहीं करती हैं तो then subsection 6 will be attracted and TDS liability will arise. वो conditions पूरी करनी जरूरी है, और वो दो conditions सिर्फ इतनी ये हैं कि मेरे को पैन नंबर प्रोड्यूस करना है, पैन नंबर लेके रखना है, और मेरे को उस वेंडर से एक डिक्लेरेशन लेनी है कि मेरा what do you call ownership of trucks is not more than 10. Once that is done, it is completely not the liability of the assessee to verify whether the person owns more than 10 trucks or not, or whether he is using anybody else's trucks or not. यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा मैं ध्यान गौरव जी की तरफ भी लेके जाऊंगा, जिसमें कि मैं ये चाहूंगा कि आगे से assessees इस बात का ध्यान रख सकते हैं, because now is an era of e-way bills. Every transporter is providing e-way bill to the vendor also containing the truck numbers. Now अगर मैंने declaration लेनी है तो मैं उस declaration को थोड़ा ज्यादा comprehensive करने के लिए इतना जरूर वो ले सकता हूं कि उससे truck numbers enlist करा लूं और अपने e-way bills के अंदर आगे से verify कर लूं कि वो 10 trucks हैं कि नहीं है. Although that is definitely, I must say, having said this, I will definitely say this is not a condition of the Income Tax Act, rather only a precaution, added precaution, which I can suggest to the people. But legally answering, no sir, there is no other requirement, and yes, the Sugarcum Mumbai judgment is directly applicable. Rather, I can quote another judgment, which is Sohma Rani Ghosh versus DCIT, ITA number 1420 Calcutta. This is a 2016 judgment, 9th of September 2016. If you want, I can share these two judgments, 3 judgments on the group also. Sir. Namit, I guess I am able to justify to the query.
Yes, completely, sir. Agreed, sir. Completely, it was done. Now, moving for next query. It's for GST. It's of Mr. Rajendra Gupta, sir. It is what is status regarding input tax which was claimed against AC and mobile phone. Should he reverse the input tax or deposit cash against the input tax? If reversed, how much the amount to be reversed? Is there any GST liability against the said card where he never had claimed? I don't think he has written properly the query. He never any claim.
So in this particular case, we will the case is divided into 2 parts. Number 1, in case of the ITC on AC and mobile, I don't see a reason when an AC is installed in your office or factory or admin office, whatever. So that is being used in the course or furtherance of the business, and that is also not getting stuck in the nuance of being used in the supply of exempted goods or exempted services, or for that matter, non-business purpose. No reversal is required in the case of ITC in AC unless you have claimed a ITC on the AC installed at your home. Number one. Number two, in case of your mobile phone, if you can demonstrate that you have two numbers, one of which is being used in for official purpose and the other one is used for your personal purpose, then if you're claiming the ITC on your official number, again no reversal is required in this particular case. However, when there is a common number and the common number is also being put to a non-business use, which we have already spoken, then 5% of the ITC, total ITC taken, common ITC, need to be reversed. Now, Rajendra ji, please appreciate the formula is simply saying, when is there any ITC put to common business, which is a common ITC and put to non-business use? If the answer is yes to any of the ITC which is common, then 5% of the entire common ITC will be reversed. Please do remember that. So we prefer in many cases that the companies, they do not take the credits of the mobile phones or petty amounts which may tomorrow fall within the ambit of the common ITC. So that is one position which you have to take on a client basis. But if it is a company where the communication is very high and the employees have their personal mobile numbers apart from the mobile number which is given by the company for official use, then in that particular case, companies are not supposed to reverse any amount because that particular number is given for complete official purpose by the company to the employee. Second, is there any GST liability against a said car where he never ever claimed any ITC? So the question is that the person has sold a motor vehicle and that particular person has never claimed any input tax credit on that particular motor vehicle. So this particular issue has already been addressed by the government. In case of sale of a motor vehicle on which ITC has not been claimed, there has been a reduction in the rate notification whereby the value of motor vehicle which will be exigible to tax will be the differential value between the sale value of that vehicle and the income tax WDV of that particular vehicle. So for example, you purchased a vehicle for 10 lakh rupees and now the income tax WDV of that vehicle is 6 lakh rupees and you're selling that vehicle for 5 lakh rupees. Since your sale value is less than your income tax valuation WDV, you do not have to pay any tax on the sale of motor vehicle. In case that value, sale value is 7 lakh rupees, then in that particular case, you have to pay the tax at the rate of 18% on 1 lakh rupees. So this particular amendment has been brought in the rate notification itself. Secondly, sir, if you have taken the ITC, full tax will be leviable on the output. Now, please also appreciate that the ITC would include if even if you have taken a credit under the erstwhile regime, which is the VAT or SENVET credit rules. So please be aware that you have not availed the input in any manner. Amit bhai, that is the answer for this particular query. We can proceed on the next one.
Next question on GST. What is the rate of tax on samosa and other fried items, and under which HSN code above items will fall?
Shailendra, as usual, the query is very, very typical. The thing is that samosa can be both a restaurant item also, and it can also be a namkeen. In both the cases, if you see, uh, the coverage is very, very important. And in case it does not fall into the food preparation elsewhere classified, then even the thing can be, exigible at the rate of 18%. But to my humble opinion, namkeens which are branded namkeens, they are exigible at the rate of 12%. Sweetmeats in all cases are exigible at 5%. Non-branded namkeens are taxable at 5%. So restaurant supplies which are not a part of the five-star hotel having a room rent for a particular unit is taxable at 5%. Your case seems to be falling within the ambit of 5% because it is a case of non-branded items. But if you are selling samosa or other fried items by any of the branded shops, which is let's say Haldiram or any of the brands, then in that particular case you will fall within the ambit of 12%. right, sir? But we will look into the facts more. If it's a classification issue, please do not never ever take a classification reply in general from any of these speaker, because every fact will be material for classification. But sir, this is the overall rates. Amit ji, next one, please.
Next question. In case of lapsation of 2 years in GST refund, how can we get that refund?
Vinny ji, when the refund limitation has lapsed, and please respect that the limitations are very sacrosanct. Courts will not give you an opportunity to move beyond the limitation, not even so. You have a very celebrated judgment of Honorable Supreme Court where the time limit for even the condonation has been lapsed. That is, I think, Punjab tractors. It has been lapsed, and the assessee appealed that the opportunity must be given to him to apply for appeal. Then in that particular case, Honorable Supreme Court has held that since the statute provide for a particular limitation, even the commissioner or the higher authorities do not have a power to condone that particular delay. Now, similar would be the case of the refund also. If you have deposited any amount as tax and you are wanting to claim that particular refund, then there is a limitation of 2 years. However, if you are not, if you have not deposited any amount as tax but inadvertently deposited something with the government, then you have plethora of judgments starting from Kawasi and Company 1978 Supreme Court and henceforth, where you can simply go. There is no limitation on any amount which is not a tax and deposited with the government, because Article 265 of the Constitution very simply says that there has to be an authority of law both in terms of levy and collection, and if there is either of the elements, meaning thereby the authority of law, is missing in the levy or collection, then that particular amount cannot be retained, and anything which is not empowered under the Constitution, there is no limitation on that particular amount. So whether that particular amount is a tax deposition, so in case of refunds of exports, or for that matter the SEZ supplies, refunds in the case of inverted duties, yes, limitations will be a big challenge. But in case there was a deposition in cash account, which is a deposit with the government, or for that matter any amount which is deposited out of I would say mistake, there will be no time limits which will be applicable in those cases. Yes, sir.
Next question is of income tax to Jaspal sir. It's if an individual has 2 businesses, turnover from his first business is 1.5 crore and from other business it's 0.6 crore. Is he required to get his account audited under Section 44 AB of Income Tax Act 1961?
सर ये सवाल जितना छोटा है ये उतना ही मैं कहूंगा गहरा सवाल है. इट्स अ वेरी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग सब्जेक्ट. इसके लिए जब मैंने ये क्वेश्चन पढ़ा था, although I knew the answer, but I did refer to 3 different sections and I tried to look into a complete depth of this question. सर यहाँ पे सवाल क्या है कि मेरे एक इंडिविजुअल है जिसके 2 बिजनेसेस हैं, which is 1.5, and his turnovers from different businesses are 1.5 crores and 0.6 crores. सर सबसे पहले हम इसके अंदर देखेंगे सेक्शन 44AB. सेक्शन 44AB क्या कहता है? It says every person carrying on business shall, if his total sales, turnover or gross receipts, as the case may be, in business exceeds rupees 1 crore in any previous year. सर अगर सिर्फ सेक्शन 44AB देखा जाए तो the answer is very simply, I would say, yes, it is required to be audited. मैं इसको क्वेश्चन को थोड़ा सा और अमेंड भी करूंगा. मैं कहता हूं मेरे 2 बिजनेसेस हैं जिसके अंदर मेरे एक बिजनेस के अंदर सेल है 80 लाख की और दूसरे बिजनेस के अंदर है 60 लाख की. Collective turnover is 1.4 crores. Yes, sir, it is still auditable. There is no doubt upon it. This has been the era ever since. प्रॉब्लम कहां आई है 2015 के बाद, जहां पे सेक्शन 44AD थोड़ा सा अमेंड हुआ था. Earlier also there was section 44AD wherein accounts were under the presumptive assessment. We were supposed to declare a profit of only 5% of the total turnover, and 44AD AB was not required to be was not attracted. Now sir, the problem कहां से जो शुरू होती है वो है section 44AD, and in the current form it is applicable by way of explanation, which says for the purpose of this section eligible assessee उसकी definition दी गई है and eligible business उसकी definition दी गई है. Unfortunately as eligible assessee के अंदर turnover का जिक्र नहीं है and eligible business के अंदर turnover का issue दिया गया है. Now on a plain reading of this section 44AD, what a assumption can be कि अगर मेरा एक eligible business जिसकी turnover 1.5 करोड़ है और मैंने 44AD के अंदर 8% या 6% as the case में भी मैंने profit दिखा दिया है, no need of audit under section 44AB, and my other business is also applicable, is also covering both the conditions. I am an eligible assessee and I am an eligible business, a different business. Now on a plain reading, I would say it can be assumed that this section will not be attracted, 44AB. However sir, in my humble opinion 44AB का audit जरूरी है. क्यों? 44AB deal करता है on a total turnover of the person, and in here 44AD also I have two businesses but they are being held by one single person and they are being audited under one PAN itself. अगर मैं इसकी practical compliances में भी जाऊंगा, yes I can have two audit reports under 44AD for different businesses, मतलब sorry हम उसके अंदर report कर देंगे. However for reporting our turnover in our return of income हमने टोटल एक जगह पे अपनी रिपोर्टिंग्स करनी है जहां पे टोटल टर्नओवर दी जाएगी. वहां पे जैसे ही 2 करोड़ से ऊपर की हम फिगर लिखेंगे, CPC itself in the processing of return it will say that it was required to be audited and you file a revised return or we will treat it as an invalid return. In my opinion sir, 144AB is attracted because if the collective turnover will increase from 2 crores, 44AB पे हम वापस आ जाएंगे और हमारी जो 44AD से हम बाहर आ जाएंगे और 44AB एप्लीकेबल हो जाएगा जहां पे हमारी टर्नओवर इज ऑलरेडी एक्सीडिंग द लिमिट. सो डेफिनेटली माय ओपिनियन सेज दैट इट इज ऑडिटेबल. मैं कुछ जजमेंट्स की भी बात करना चाहूंगा. नाउ आई बिकॉज आई वांट टू रिपोर्ट एन एरा व्हिच वाज प्रीवियस टू दिस करंट फॉर्म ऑफ 44AD. आई एम सॉरी, वहां पे शायद 44AE सेक्शन हुआ करता था जहां पे हम 5% पे करते थे. वहां पे ये एलिजिबल एसएससी और एलिजिबल बिजनेस का इशू नहीं हुआ करता था. वहां पे सिर्फ एक एलिजिबल बिजनेस के नाम पे एक कंडीशन थी व्हिच वाज रिटेल सेल ऑफ इफ द पर्सन इज इन रिटेल सेल ऑफ गुड्स. सर वहां पे भी अगर हमारे पास दो अलग अलग नाम से बिजनेसेस हैं तो वी वर रिक्वायर्ड टू गेट द अकाउंट्स ऑडिटेड अंडर 44AB. So I would carry that perception of the government, rather this I will carry that soul of the legislature in the current form of 44AD and AB to state that yes 44AB will be applicable in such a scenario. I'm good. Yeah.
Next question is of GST. There's a GST of proprietorship firm has been cancelled and has not been restored. It was cancelled due to non-filing of returns. Now all penalty and tax has been paid and returns has been filed. The officer is not restoring it, insisting to pay interest at first. We have around 25% and rest all will pay once money flow starts. Additionally, he is still running his business without GST. What could be the implication in it? Sir.
See, the problem is, number one, when you are mentioning, Amiji, that he's running his business without GST, that one problem is a grave problem because the cancellation is not yet effected. As I can understand, the cancellation has been done, the restoration application has been placed, but restoration application, due to the non-payment of the interest, is still into abeyance. Now, the person who is who has applied for that particular matter, he will have to pay the entire amount. This is no choice with that particular person. So if he is carrying on his business without GST, at the outset, I would number one say he's running the peril, because as on date his registration stands cancelled, and he will not be having the input tax credit which otherwise was available to him, because section 16 subsection 1 starts with very specific words. The any registered person. So if the person is not registered as on date, he will not be able to take the credit of the input tax credit. Number two, his liability to pay the GST despite his cancellation does not stop, because he still remains a person liable to take the registration and a taxable person under section 22, because a taxable person means a person who is registered or liable to be registered. Liable to be registered means who has a turnover more than the specified turnover also, and in this particular case this person will fall within the ambit of taxable person, so his output liability is still running. My humble suggestion to you would be, please borrow money from somewhere and pay your interest and ask the officer to restore, so that you can comply with all your compliances and take your credits. In case you do not have the money, the resort to you is you should immediately file an appeal with the respective person. I would also like to highlight that Rule 23 of the CGST rule, I would like to read it out once for you. A registered person whose application is cancelled by the proper officer on his own motion may submit an application for revocation of cancellation to such proper officer within a period of 30 days. Now that particular term has been extended also, provided that no application for revocation shall be filed if the registration has been cancelled for failure of the registration to furnish the returns, unless such returns are furnished and any amount of tax in terms of such return has been paid, along with any amount payable towards interest, penalty and late fee in respect of the said return. Now the problem is the rule itself. To my humble opinion, you should work out your interest in such a manner. Number one, it has been calculated on the net amount. The rule does not give you space to not to pay the interest, rather even the late fee and etc, everything is to be paid. Number three, if you still feel that no, I need my restoration, please do file an appeal, but do not continue the business on the basis of a cancelled registration. That will take you to a level where your ITC will be into trouble and your liability does not stop. So that will be a humble suggestion from my side. Please do look into it. Amit ji.
Next question, sir. It's also of GST. Query is whether ITC is available if RCM is wrongly paid on any expenses for which RCM was not payable, in view of words used as tax payable in the definition of input tax under clause B of section 262 of the CGST Act. Whether RCM is payable on late fee of GST, on TDS filing, late fee, etc., in view of RCM on government services. If payable, then whether exemption limit of 5,000 as per relevant exemption notification is to be calculated per month or each for CGST and SGST. Kindly clarify how limit of rupees 5,000 is to be calculated.
See, if you look into that particular definition, it says input tax in relation to registered person means a central tax, integrated UT or state tax charged on any supply of goods or services or both made to him, and includes number one, integrated on the import of goods; B, tax payable under the provisions of section 3 and 4 of section 9. Now please appreciate two things. The wordings of section 2 subsection 62, they say any tax charged on any supply. And number B says tax payable under the provisions of subsection 3 and 4. The intent of putting the word payable in the clause, subclause B, C, and wherever, it is applicable for both 3 and 4. So let us take a forward case scenario first, where you have went on to buy a printer, and the printer, it can fall within the category of 12% also, it can fall within the category of 18% also. Reason being, multi-function printer or the simple printer will fall into different tax rates. Now the person is charging you a wrong tax rate, and he has charged you a rate of 18 18% instead of 12. Now the tax payable on that particular printer was 12%, but you paid 18%. So will you not be allowed to take the credit, because the wordings in 62B says tax payable under the provisions of subsection 3 and 4 of section 9, or for that matter under the provisions of section 9(1) also. Now the person who is availing the credit will say, no sir, that is a tax charged from me, and as per section 2 subsection 62, that is one tax which is outrightly available to me in the first part of the definition. However, in the second part, when it is a reverse charge mechanism, the dispute comes up because the tax is not charged. The tax is made payable via section 9(3) and 9(4). But having said so, we also have to read section 31. Section 31, subsection 1, subclause F, it talks about the issuance of an invoice in cases where the other person uh, is the recipient is liable to pay the tax. Now, in this particular case, the recipient is liable to issue a self invoice if it is received from an unregistered supplier. So, take two scenarios: RCM under a scenario where the tax invoice is issued by the person who is registered, but tax is payable under the reverse charge. Second scenario, tax invoices under the self invoice mechanism, and it is by the person who is the recipient himself. Now in both the cases, since there is a tax invoice which is there and the tax thereon has been charged, to my humble opinion, it is covering the scenario, it is being covered in the under the scenario of 262 in the first part only, and therefore the inclusion, though it helps the assessee, will not become a barrier in terms of becoming a hyper technical dispute, because that particular tax has also been charged on the tax invoice, either issued by the supplier or by the recipient under section 31. So in both the cases, my dear friend, you will be having the benefit of the first part of section 2 subsection 62, and merely the word tax payable should not become barrier to us in the second part. Alternatively, there has been plethora of judgments where a wrong tax has been charged by the supplier. So even in case of recipient of supplier of a exempt supply, while there is a barrier which has been provided by way of explanation to section 11 on the supplier of an exempt supply, that he cannot avail the ITC because he cannot change the color of an exempt supply, the similar barrier is not there in terms of the recipient from such supplier. So friend, please appreciate, you will not get stuck into the mere words tax payable, since the law also has a mechanism of issuance of invoice and charging tax thereon. Please read section 31 along with the relevant rules to make a constructive interpretation, a comprehensive interpretation, taking together both the definition of input tax and also the tax charge. Number two, whether RCM is payable on late fees of GST, TDS filing, etc. in view RCM of government services. Sir, a very good question, but RCM is applicable in the cases of limit of 5,000, as you have already said. How limit is of rupees 5,000? 5,000 limit is per transaction. So if the transaction is a single transaction, that will be seen as one. In the case of late fees of GST, I would place it in the similar bracket of late fees of ROC. Yes, there has been dilemma, but it has been the MCA has come out with a clarification that GST will not be payable on the reverse. I need to look into that particular clarification as do I remember. But friend, I would definitely keep it in this particular question. To my humble opinion, there will not be any RCM because there is no supply of any kind of service by the government. It is a late fee on your suo motu act of delay. Yes, fees, it has been defined by Honorable Supreme Court. If you look into the plethora of judgments which have been there in earlier regimes also, and under the different acts also, fees is taken as an amount chargeable by the government for any particular action done to the recipient. However, there are cases also where they have said that fees is also a collection in terms of, it is not tax. Yes, it is not tax, but it can also be a collection for any of the actions which are supposed to be done by the SSC and not done. So I would like to place it not as a supply, but as more of a penal penalty or a penal fees on the SSC, not exigible to GST. Please, sir. Amit ji, next question.
So last question for the day. So it's also of GST. It's procurement of EPCC license holder from 100% EOU. EPCC license holder is exempted from payment of customs duty, including IGST on its import of capital goods. Such license holder, if procure goods from 100% EOU, will he still be allowed the same exemption in GST as the procurement from 100% EOU by recipient in domestic tariff area is treated at par with imports?
So I need some more facts into this, Anjali ji. I think the question is not complete. I am missing on one particular limb, that when the EOU is supplying to the DTA, the Domestic Tariff Area Unit, which custom barrier or custom port, or for that matter the the custom tariff area, what is being the goods are moved from that particular area to the other area. This particular query is not holding the exact circumference of that particular territory. I need to know the facts more in this particular case to answer this, because to my humble opinion there will be no levy. The tax will be supposed to be charged from the by the EOU to the DTA. But if there is some specific custom duty barrier, which is there between the EOU and the the recipient in DTA, let's know the facts more, and then only we can answer this particular query. Right, sir? So Amit bhai, I think all queries for today we are through. Yes, there are questions which might be left as I have been given to understand, and which we'll be taking in the next webinar session. The link for the webinar will be, the questions will be open for all members. That link you can keep on putting your questions. We will try to keep more sessions if required. Today we had the absence of other speakers also, but yes, next time we will be definitely having the benefit of a bigger panel for all the members. So with these words, Jaspal bhai and Amit bhai, please.
Thank you, Gaurav bhai. I just add one thing here. I have shared the details of the full name of the cases that I shared in that box. Members can note down the cases from there also, and I'll share it on the group members group also in a little while. Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Amit.
Thank you, Gaurav sir. Thank you, Jaspal sir, for sharing your views and solving the queries on income tax and GST. We'll surely try to meet again next week with some more issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.